Okay, well, tonight we have a great guest. We have Jerrfrey Meikle, and if you're not familiar, he, well, you all should be, but he's the author of this book, which is a very, very good book. He spoke to our club once before, a couple of years ago. The book called Postcard America. It's available on Amazon. Curt Teich and postcards from the Curt Teich Company. And tonight he's going to talk about one of its star salesman representatives who primarily sold postcards on the West Coast. And so take it away, Jeff.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank you for the invitation to speak again. As if you were here before last time for my talk, it's pretty much the same talk. I've revised it a bit, but Michael just said to do the same thing, that there'd be more new people who hadn't heard it. So now I'm a professor, so I kind of read things, but I try to do it, in an engaging way, and I hope the images will keep you involved. But I've found over years of teaching that reading is the best way to get a lot of information across quickly. So anyway, without further ado, here we go. A woman in Western New York, and I don't know how close she might have been to some of you, received this colorful postcard in 1937 with a radiant Arizona desert landscape viewed against a sky streaked with reds, yellows, and purples. I haven't seen this, she wrote, but they do say it's real. Now, I don't know if she was thinking how unreal it looked, or if she simply meant that she hadn't actually been there yet and seen it with her own two eyes. But today, from a modern perspective, the bold lines and delicate color washes suggest a watercolor, not a realistic color photo. Postcards like this were called linen cards because their surface embossing simulated the weave of linen. Linen cards dominated the American market from 1931 into the 1950s, when they were replaced by chromes made directly from color photos. Linen cards were based on black and white photos retouched by airbrush, colorized according to a paint by numbers system, and printed by offset lithography. Curt Teich and Company in Chicago originated the linen format, and other companies soon copied it. Teich's sales department promoted these beautiful miniature paintings, that's their language, as aristocratic, but millions were sold for a penny apiece. They portrayed an optimistic American scene of natural landscapes, roadside attractions, and modern technological marvels during the uncertain times of the Great Depression and World War II. Teich and Company published 50,000 different linen views of the United States. Other printers who imitated Teich's process brought the total number of different views to about 100,000. Altogether, 1 billion linen cards were printed in 25 years. Their commercial success indicates wide popular acceptance of their collective portrait of America. Rugged nature views often included modern highways offering easy access by car and bus. Representing humanity's control over nature, linen postcards glorified the technology of bridges, dams, factories, and tunnels. Towns and cities appeared in bird's eye views and skylines, often at night, when brilliant electric light emphasized outlines of buildings and windows. Street scenes portrayed an array of commercial signs with crowds reflecting the positive urban tempo. Views of urban landmarks heralded each location as unique, while a common visual style conveyed a sense of the generic. The visual extravagance of linen cards was perfect for representing stylized Art Deco skyscrapers and World's Fairs, indicating wide faith in modern technology during the Great Depression's hard times. Linen cards often also promoted roadside attractions, hotels, tourist cabins, and restaurants. The colorful linen process heightened the effects of such buildings. Interior views of hotel lobbies, cocktail lounges, and other commercial establishments relied on paint chips and upholstery samples sent by clients to authenticate patterns and colors. Cards with interior views often seem the most realistic of linen cards owing to their details. But the artist John Bader, the painter, whose paintings imitate linen cards, describes their fabricated realism as having a messed with quality. Linen cards were produced by a printing process devised in 1930 at Curt Teich Company in Chicago. The company was already known as the General Motors of the postcard industry. I think it was a Business Week or Forbes that said that. The motive of reducing the cost of making a product that sold for only a penny led during the Depression to a new, visually innovative style of postcard, new inks, new embossed paper, and a new streamlined means of colorizing the images and making the printing plates came together simultaneously. A new means of production, an economic necessity, yielded a new look, a new style, a new aesthetic. The founder of the company was Curt Teich, a German immigrant who had arrived in Chicago in 1895 at the age of 18. His grandfather and father had already established a large printing and publishing business in Lobenstein and Dresden, Germany. But Curt quarreled with his father and immigrated to Chicago rather than taking over the family business as he was supposed to. Here's a postcard printed by his father, Christian Teich, showing the family's hometown of Lobenstein. Teich established a small printing business in Chicago, and by 1898 decided to publish postcards. At first, like most American producers, he ordered his cards from Germany, such as this one from 1904, showing the Chicago Tribune newspaper's headquarters, labeled as publication number 27. But in 1909, a new tariff made it too costly to import German-produced cards, and Teich began printing his own. He printed thousands of different images for Hugh Layton of Maine, who previously relied on German printers, and then branched out under his own name. Curt Teich's big break came in 1910, when the Woolworth dime store chain ordered thousands of images from him. And here we can see, this is one of the pre-linen postcards on the left, color lithography, multicolor, delicate washes over fairly heavy detailed black line printing, and one of the early presses that enabled the production of, I think, 60-some cards simultaneously. And on the lower right, a detail of the card, and you can see there's an actual shop on the main street in Marion, Ohio, selling postcards.
Excuse me, Jeff, for one second. Could everybody please mute themselves? We got some background noise. So just check, make sure, and mute your mic. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I should have stopped and said something about that too, but hey, thank you. Anyway, you can see from the detail that there was an actual shop on the main street of Marion, Ohio, that simply sold postcards because they were a big deal at that time. Then came the linen postcard in 1931, trademarked as CT Art Color Tone, a new type with a distinctive texture, bolder, brighter, more colorful, and less expensive to produce. These postcards from the 30s and 40s were radically different from the soft, washed out images of the previous 20 years, but travelers and tourists accepted them as true representations of reality. The process of making a linen postcard began with a traveling sales agent. Here we see one of them, G.I. Pitchford, the only sales agent whose identity emerges clearly from company records. More about him in a moment, but first I'd like to describe how these images were produced. My description of the process is based on research in the job files of linen cards preserved in the Curt Teich Postcard Archives at the Newberry Library in Chicago. There were 10 main sales agents, each responsible for a different region of the US. The Teich sales agent served as a photographer of postcard views and sometimes as a postcard designer. An agent traveled widely, showed sample cards to proprietors of motels, restaurants, and tourist attractions, and tried to convince stationery shops and drugstores to order a range of local views supplemented with generic landscapes, large letter cards, and humorous cards. Sometimes a client or customer provided the source photo for a postcard view, but more often the sales agent photographed a scene with a view camera yielding high resolution 4x5-inch negatives and 8x10-inch glossy prints. For example, here's the source photo for a postcard illustrating the City Hall in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Along with a photo, the agent provided instructions for retouching, adding or removing details, for colors using a paint by number code and brief written notes, and on a separate sheet for caption and text. Here's a card showing the paint by number code that was used in 1932. Many sales agents suggested substantial changes to images, not in response to client preferences or company policy, but relying on their own sense of what made an attractive card. After an order arrived at the Teich plant, it went to the art department with a staff of about 150 people, including airbrush retouching artists, all of them men who we see here, and colorists, all of them women. An airbrush artist retouched the new photo by eliminating utility poles, beat up Model T Fords, or other offending elements. The artist also clarified lettering on signs, if there were any, added late model cars or flags flying above buildings, and boosted contrasts and highlights to create a dramatic monochrome image. Next, the watercolorist prepared a hand-painted postcard-sized color proof to be sent to the client for approval. In this case, the client protested that the image was too colorful. The client insisted that the deep colored sky and grass must be toned down because our South Dakota colors are not so brilliant. The next step was color separation, using a chart that broke down dozens of coded colors into ratios of cyan, magenta, yellow, and dark blue. The colorist made 4 separate proofs, one for each color, from which copper printing plates were made. Offset lithography in 4 colors over a black halftone base yielded complex color effects. Admittedly, this was not the most exciting or attractive linen postcard. Here's one from 1940 that has a bit more going for it. We see a diesel locomotive pulling a passenger train along a curving diagonal through an orange grove with shiny leaves and bright fruit overhanging the tracks. Approaching sunset suffuses the sky behind snow-capped mountains. Colors are saturated. Lines are crisp. The embossed texture creates a luminous richness. Mike Davis, a historian who wrote about Southern California, might have been thinking of this image when he said that old postcards promote an idyllic image of homes and orchards soaking in sunshine at the foot of snow-peaked mountains. Unlike so much else about the region, he continued, the image was not entirely fake. But ironically, this Teich image was completely fake, thanks to manipulations by sales agent G.I. Pitchford, who referred to himself as the company's Western representative. Unlike most postcards, this image was not based on a single black and white photo, but on a photo collage made by Pitchford. And here we see it. The sales agent collaged together pieces cut from 9 different photos. These pieces included the train and 2 tracks, the mountains and sky above, 2 sections of orange grove on the right, at least 2 more along the left, and a close-up of oranges on the upper left. In Pitchford's original collage, the train was moving toward the right, but he decided the scene worked better with the train moving from right to left. So after photographing this collage, he reversed the negative to make this photographic print, and this is what he sent to the Teich office. This view was not Pitchford's only collage. Here, for example, and I don't have the postcard that was made from this, but on the upper left, we see a photograph of a Japanese garden somewhere in California, and next to it, a photo of some geishas, which he has clipped out, and he has collaged that onto the photo on the left to make the source photo, from which a source photo would be made for a postcard. Pitchford even kept an envelope full of bits of cactus, different photos ready to use, and another with figures of Native Americans. Along with the collage, Pitchford sent instructions for colors: stainless steel for the engine skirting and passenger coaches, a golden color for oranges, blue-gray for very distant mountains, and lavender and pink for tiny bushes below the orange trees on the right. When he told the company's artists to fix up the sky, he knew they would rely on their vast experience. The collage was rough, with edges showing, but it was enough for the artist who retouched it with an airbrush. This project highlights Pitchford as a clever interpreter of popular landscape cliches and as a skilled postcard designer. As I said earlier, G.I. Pitchford is the only sales agent who emerges as a personality from Teich Company records at the Newberry Library. I was able to locate his son, Bob Pitchford, a retired architect in Palm Desert, California. Bob had a huge archive of photos, negatives, correspondence, and miscellaneous papers documenting his father's career. Bob invited me to visit for several days and go through these materials, and he and his sister Marnie spent several hours talking about their father and his career. Unfortunately, they both passed away in the last 10 years. G.I. Pitchford's sales territory encompassed Washington, Oregon, Idaho, California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and parts of New Mexico, many of the nation's most scenic natural areas and some of its fastest growing cities, such as Los Angeles and Las Vegas. Pitchford's long experience of the West's varied geography and his role in commissioning a wide range of views contributed to the linen postcard's unique aesthetic and to its portrayal of an idealized American scene. Born in Ohio in 1887, Pitchford grew up in Duquesne, Pennsylvania, where his father, an English immigrant, was a foreman in a Carnegie steel plant. His initials, G.I., stood for Garnet Irving. His father had named him for the British general Garnet Wolseley, who is so efficient that the phrase, "everything's all Sir Garnet," is still used in Britain, and I've heard it there to mean everything's in order. Pitchford told his friends to call him Pitch. After studying bookkeeping, Pitchford worked for 2 years as a stenographer at the steel mill and then headed west to Los Angeles around 1908, hoping to enter the Nickelodeon business, get into the movie business from the ground up. Instead, in 1912, shortly after getting married, he became a sales agent for his wife's stepfather, William Carlin, who had just purchased a local postcard publisher, the Cardinal Vincent Company. The renamed Carlin Postcard Company survived only a few years. They subcontracted printing of their cards to several companies, including Teich, and specialized in colorized views of the West Coast. Over a 3-year period, Pitchford shifted to working exclusively for Teich. He bragged in a letter to a friend in 1915 that he had the whole coast for my territory and was spending most of my time on the road. He reported he had been connected with a Chicago house for about a year and was getting along nicely. Pitchford sent his first printing order to Teich in May 1913, the start of a relationship that lasted until his death, still at work, at age 80 in 1967. Pitchford was soon taking many of the photos for his cards after teaching himself to use a large format view camera, but he relied on commercial labs for developing and printing. And here we see a few examples of West Coast images by Pitchford. His letters reveal the typical duties of a postcard sales agent. He worked for Teich on a commission basis and served as a middleman between client and company. He judged the creditworthiness of new customers and alerted the home office if an account was in danger. He visited hotels, restaurants, and retail stores in his territory, urging them to promote their businesses with postcards. He tracked down missing shipments for customers and backed up their claims of poor design or printing at Chicago. Like other agents, Pitchford filed weekly reports of his visits to customers. Some of those customers were wholesale distributors who commissioned cards from him, while some were retailers who sold them directly to the public. For decades, Pitchford spent 3/4 of his time on the road. Carefully planned itineraries took him through his vast territory to small retail outlets and major wholesale distributors. One customer would claim to be working old down and thus could take no cards at present. Or another would be planning to order new subjects in a few months, and Pitchford would have to return to take photos for a spring order. On one occasion, he noted it was too foggy to take pictures. After another visit, Pitchford wrote frankly, "This manager is impossible." When he was at home, the tapping of his portable typewriter was constant. And on one occasion, he was typing business letters on Christmas Day. His daughter recalled him as a good father, but said he loved every minute on the road and could hardly wait to get going again. Pitchford returned to Chicago by train once a year to consult with the Home Office. He regarded Curt Teich and his son Curt Jr., who became the company's general manager by 1940, as a couple of stubborn Germans. But Pitchford was on excellent terms with another German immigrant, the company's vice president, Frank Hokiger, who eventually retired to the Pasadena area. During one of Hokiger's visits to check on Western sales, Pitchford took a photo of Hokiger posing in front of an abandoned gas station. As a joke, Pitchford retouched the photo with a sign reading Frank Hokiger's place. He then submitted the photo to the company as a fake postcard order. According to family legend, Curt Teich Sr. took it seriously and was angry when he discovered the practical joke. Scholars have argued about the degree of independence enjoyed by sales agents, photographers, and artists in the Teich production process. Referring to the retouching and colorizing artists, Mark Pascal, an art historian, claimed these grunts on the job ladder went beyond responsibilities and injected their own talents into their work. On the other hand, discussing the photos taken by sales agents, the historian Peter Hales argued their photography had no artistic integrity. According to Hales, all artistic improvement occurred at the factory, according to stereotyped specifications, reducing the photographer's role to a rudimentary sketching process. Pitchford's career suggests otherwise. He often sought the perfect image by taking multiple photos of a single scene. For example, Avalon Bay on Catalina Island under various conditions, and Fremont Street in Las Vegas by day and by night, with shifting arrays of cars and pedestrians. He employed traditional landscape conventions such as diagonal sightlines and the framing device of overhanging branches. But he also envisioned street scenes from a driver's perspective by crouching under the black cloth hood of his view camera in the middle of the street. Modern transportation animated his landscapes, whether curving mountain roads or city streets flowing with neon. Some of his photographic compositions revealed considerable artistry. Even this contrived view of Laguna Beach was based on a carefully underexposed, high contrast photo. Pitchford's design instructions at the Home Office were often assertive, sometimes angry, suggesting pride in his work and a feeling of independence. He enjoyed great success in his career as a sales agent. By 1930, he and his wife, Star, were living in a new custom-built Spanish-style stucco house in San Marino, valued at $10,000. During the 1930s, they built a vacation home on Lake Arrowhead in the San Bernardino Mountains, a resort area trendy with the Hollywood set. In 1943, the Pitchfords moved to a house northwest of Pasadena that had formerly belonged to the silent film star Clara Kimball Young. In that year, 1943, according to his only surviving tax records, he earned $30,000 in commissions, an income that put him in the top 0.5% of all US taxpayers. That year may have been unusual, with soldiers, sailors, Marines, and defense workers moving into and through the Western states and sending postcards to loved ones across the country. Even so, he succeeded far beyond what we might expect for a traveling salesman. What I'd like to do now is to examine several of Pitchford's postcard images, some in detail, others more briefly. They reveal him as an imaginative, clever, resourceful designer who knew what would sell, but whose work was also genuinely creative. Let's start with one of his typical landscape cards. This view of a luminous Arizona desert landscape emphasizes the dramatic S-curve of a road hugging a mountain while descending toward a distant plain. An automobile, propped in the direction from which it travels, creates a dynamic relationship to the landscape. Pitchford's composition invites us to assume the driver's perspective, looking over a curving vista to the city of Tucson on the horizon. Emphasized by a halo effect, he asked the art department to preserve. An intense raking light illuminates the edges of the cactus and renders luminous the flowers and plants on the hillside. Pitchford insisted this effect of the sun shining through the needles must be preserved as the Teich art department moved from photo to postcard. Rippling shadows on the dirt road in front of the car suggest washboard erosion. The deep texturing of the road surface is unusual for a linen card, indicating the artist's desire to do justice to Pitchford's photos. Natural landscapes are best experienced by car, the image suggests, with easy access to the limitless American scene. No one knew that better than Pitchford, whose 1940 Buick sedan energized this view, though the car was actually parked at the side of the road, a fact obvious in the photo, but not in the postcard, where it appears it might be traveling. Here's another Pitchford landscape card. The image is unusual for prominently featuring a young woman looking out over a mountain vista from a scenic overlook. In most overlook views, the possessive gaze is presented from a dominant male perspective. But here, it is a vigorous, outdoorsy woman who looks over the landscape. Her hair is open to the breeze, one hand is on her hip, the other is casually draped over a knee. She wears pants, hiking boots, a loose white blouse open at the throat, and a casual jacket. But in actual fact, not only had the young woman not hiked up to the overlook, she probably was never even there. The Teich job file reveals that Pitchford wanted a pretty model to enhance the mountain view. He cut her image from another photo and collaged it onto his photo of the overlook. He instructed the artist in Chicago to preserve features of the girl as much as possible, so her face will look natural. Pitchford also seemed to want to soften and domesticate the landscape. There is a lot of distance here, and the view is very impressive, he wrote, but he also warned, do not outline too harshly. The distant mountains have some mauve tones and look very much like velvet. This card was exceptional among Pitchford's work for featuring an individual so prominently. Here's another card that was extremely unusual for him. Pitchford himself took the source photo at Black Rock Beach on the south shore of Great Salt Lake, just west of Salt Lake City. In his instructions to the art department, Pitchford told them to put strong reds in sky for a sunset effect. His original photo showed an empty beach with no bathers. He instructed the art department to add bathers as per sample attached or any other group that might be adaptable. As we see in the card, enthusiastic young women enliven the dull scene. As it turns out, they're exactly the same young women who romped through the surf at Miami Beach in an earlier card in 1935. Someone in the art department retrieved the retouched photo from the Miami Beach job file, rephotographed it, cut out the group of bathers, collaged them onto Pitchford's photo of Black Rock Beach, retouched everything, and then sent it to a colorist who changed the colors of one woman's bathing suit and added stripes to 3 others. The Miami Beach image was copyrighted by photographer Frank Bell, who worked for the Miami Herald newspaper, but he got no credit for the Black Rock card, nor for cards from many other places where these well-traveled young women soon began to appear. Although Pitchford was responsible for thousands of cards that were not based on photo collages, and he provided cropping, airbrushing, and colorizing instructions for all of them, he favored and promoted collages in ways that other postcard agents did not. Here's another quick example. This card of the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco had been a bestseller for the company since its first appearance in 1932. The structure had been built for the Panama Pacific Exposition of 1915 and remained popular among San Francisco residents. In 1942, 10 years after the original card, Pitchford sent a copy of the card to the Home Office, on which he had collaged cutouts of 2 swans from a photo. The competition brought out a card that had swans in the picture, and it sells, he wrote. After airbrush work, the new replacement card was ready. We see that on the right. As a resident of Los Angeles, Pitchford paid attention to the developing cityscape. His surviving negatives and prints reveal an obsession with the intersection of Sunset and Vine in Hollywood, photographed many times under different conditions. Here is a night postcard view based on a daytime photo. It was a common practice to make night views from daytime photos in order to capture precise details and avoid glaring headlights. In the photo, pedestrians are scattered along the sidewalk. The Hollywood Hills are visible in the distance, and a flag flies over NBC's Radio City building. In general, the more a photo was retouched, the less realism the resulting card displayed. But Pitchford held the art department to high standards, and here the retouching was seamless. Building facades were smoothed, signs picked out in detail, hills obliterated, pedestrians removed, and the image cropped to exclude the flag. The automobiles were all drawn freehand, except for the one on the lower right, which was cut and collaged from another photo. Crucial to the image's success is diversity of color. Pitchford's instructions describe the NBC building as pale blue-green with a pale green glow, not strong, coming from the vertical window. Underneath the marquee, he continued, the glow is pinkish amber, fading lower into almost an orchid. he trusted the artist to put color down the avenue, which was done, with varying yellow tones emanating from display windows. The browns and grays of distant buildings contrast with the silvery gray along Vine Street. Especially effective was Pitchford's decision to remove pedestrians and thereby emphasize Los Angeles as an automobile city. In another case, Pitchford took pains with a borderless postcard entitled on the back as "The Bright Lights of Las Vegas, Nevada." This card was based on fragments of black and white photos of neon signs of 20 casinos and hotels. The project took him more than a year to complete because he kept discovering new and important signs on each trip over to Vegas. He dedicated considerable work to the project, taking photos, making the subjects to proportion, and solving the puzzle of rearranging them. He exhorted the artists to do your best to make a good subject. The design anchored dramatically tilted signs around the outline of a diesel locomotive, which was taken from a neon sign outside the city's train station. Teich artists produced an image that exploded to the card's edges with colorful icons and signs. Reflections on buildings, which Pitchford insisted on retaining, added a cubist effect. The spatial arrangement suggested the disorienting experience of driving through Las Vegas at night. Here's another Pitchford card from Vegas from 1950, which captures the city's glowing excitement and promise. Pitchford usually avoided the documentary impulse of most photography of his time. He rarely included people except to provide a sense of scale in landscapes and cityscapes. This view of a bar in Tijuana, Mexico, across the border from San Diego, is unusual for the realistic people who look directly at the observer. When Pitchford sent his design to the Home Office, he marked it in all capital letters as an important subject. Unlike many linen cards, which tend to have large expanses of uniform colors, this image is filled with photographic details. It seems very little was changed from the original photo. Eyes, eyebrows, hats, and lettering are touched up for visibility, but recognizable individuals remain undisguised. We see a Hispanic manager in a tie on the right-hand side, an Anglo bartender standing next to him, several Hispanics at the front end of the bar, patrons seated at and several Anglo patrons further back along the bar, including a sailor from the Navy base. Patrons seated at tables are of varying ethnicity, with a group of Hispanics at the lower left. The Mexicali bar invites Mexican and Anglo patrons to mix together. However, this photorealistic card presents a dishonest illusion. Pitchford's archive, the materials I examined at Bob Pitchford's at Palm Desert, reveals that he took several photos at different times from the same viewpoint. Here's one of them. The postcard is actually based on a collage of two different photos, with the line between the two sections running up the aisle that divides the counter from the tables. To the right, the postcard is based in every detail, even facial expressions and folds of cloth, on a single photo. But to the left of the line, that source photo shows not the people who appear in the postcard, but a different group. In the photo, the front table on the left is not occupied by Hispanic men with their backs to the viewer, but by two couples facing the camera. All four individuals are people of color. One couple's ethnicity is uncertain, but the other a smiling woman, and a pensive man are African American. Several other African Americans sit behind them, mixed in with Hispanics and Anglos. Tijuana itself might in reality have been a tolerant, wide open town, but for popular American consumption on a postcard, Pitchford's collage excluded African Americans. To conclude my talk, I'd like to discuss two non-controversial images. Pitchford occasionally used members of his own family as models. Here's a view of the Pike, a popular zone of seaside rides and amusements at Long Beach, California. It seems to be a warm winter day because shadows are long, even though the clock reads nearly 2 p.m. Some people are wearing or carrying coats and sweaters as if the weather had been chilly earlier, but several young women are in shorts or swimsuit. This card doesn't look that different from many crowd shots Pitchford photographed, but this one is different. The woman in a long blue coat in the foreground is his wife, Star. Beside her is a girl in a burgundy dress with a white collar, his daughter, Marnie, then about 15. Walking alone on the other side of his mother, in the center foreground, is Bob, then about 12. More than 70 years later, Bob and Marnie recalled how their father liked to pose them in photos that became postcards. Neither of them recalled any special feelings at the time as children about appearing on postcards that sold by the thousands. To end the talk, I'd like to mention a rare Pitchford card that had no basis in photography at all. In the late 1930s, he sketched this design for a comic card, Greetings from Catalina Island, featuring a bathing beauty in a two-piece swimsuit seated on one of the area's famous flying fish, holding the reins in one hand and waving with the other as she soars toward the island in the background. Also sketched in are 3 ships, a spouting whale, a comical fisherman trailing a huge fish, 3 seagulls, and 2 other distant figures seated on flying fish, both also heading toward the island and confirming the notion that, as the caption declares, there was in all the world no trip like this. Pitchford signed his sketch in the lower right corner, but the card was copyrighted by Curt Teich Company. Although all of Pitchford's creative work appeared anonymously with no credit, his accomplishments as Teich's Western representative in one of the nation's most scenic regions suggest that he was just as important as the Chicago artists and printers in developing the artistic of the linen postcard. Without his contributions to thousands of different images, as photographer and as designer, the Teich linen portrayal of the American West might have been determined at the plant in Chicago, carried out by artists and printers who were mostly German immigrants and who had never visited the American West, using randomly acquired stock photos. Pitchford provided a consistent, coherent vision based on decades of almost continuous travel through 8 Western states, an experience that sensitized him to the region's immense variety and to modern life's ongoing transformation of its wide, open spaces. In 1933, after Pitchford had been working for the company for 20 years, but roughly at the time when the linen card was introduced, the founder, Curt Teich, wrote a letter to him asking Pitchford to promote the new linen format to wholesale distributors. Push the line strongly, Teich implored, insisting the public will readily buy these pretty postcards. Pitchford needed little urging. Over the next 20 years, his photos, collages, and collaborations with the art department contributed to the overall aesthetic of the linen postcard and to its popular representation of the West, an iconic region many Americans regard as central to national identity. And here is a final image, is a photograph of Pitchford himself looking down over Lake Mead near the Hoover Dam. Thanks for your patience, and I'd be happy to take any discussion, questions, comments, and so on.
Thank you. It's very good. There must be questions. Just unmute yourself to ask a question. I've got a question to start. The numbers. Is there some kind of a logical sequence between the numbers? Most postcards have two numbers, one on the lower right, where they got letters and numbers both, and then sometimes there's another number on a different part of the postcard, also on the front side.
Yeah, let me
Wonder if
jot
there was
down
kind of-
just so I don't say the wrong thing. Or
I don't know if there was some kind of code or something in there, or they just
yes, there
arbitrarily
is. There is.
Some-
Let's see. Yeah. Okay.
put in the book.
I'm just jotting down a sample number here. Okay, let's imagine the number. This is for linen cards only. The serial number like 3AH-256 for an example. It could be also 3BH-256, 5CH. In any event, A, B, and C represents the decades. If it's an A, it's from the 1930s. If it's a B, it's from the 1940s. If it's C, it's from the 1950s. The number in front, 3AH-256, that means that the 3 is the year in that decade. So 3A is from 1943, 7B is from 1947, and so on. The H, I have no idea what that means. And after the hyphen, the number, and it goes from number 1 to thousands, that's simply the sequence in production of cards for that year. Like the first card they designed and the first card to make it through the art department and for printing plates to be ready to be made was number 1. And there are actual scrapbooks that the company kept. They're huge scrapbooks, they're about this big. And you open them and it's simply in serial number order, that is in chronological order, every postcard, for a whole year, and then the next year and the next year. And I think in my book, I say how many of these there are, but I think there are like 12 or 15 scrapbooks that have the full run of linen postcards. So that's what that number means. Other companies had different ways of doing their serial numbers, like the Tickner company, EC Crop. Each of them had their own numbering system, and I frankly don't know what those numbers mean. I've
A lot
never
of the
seen
Teich
it.
cards have another number too, like usually, and then I have it in front of me on the top left.
Oh, of the caption, maybe?
Or some in the
Yeah,
caption.
okay, yeah, that's a good question. Like
Shorter number.
those are usually show the position in a series, like the vendors, the people who ran the vending, the sales tourist franchise in Grand Canyon, for example, might order a series of 50 cards of the Grand Canyon to sell in their souvenir shop, and those would simply be numbered 1 to 50. Okay. And they would request Teich to put their own numbers there as well. But if it's a 3AH hyphen, then a number 1 to 4 digits or 5 digits, that's the Teich serial number.
He was a superb printer. Looking at the tonalities, the tones he was getting in those black and white prints, looked like he had discovered a graded coat-of-bromide papers, the same stuff that Ansel Adams used. He gets,
yeah, I think he was a great photographer.
Tone.
Yes, and I was flabbergasted to see these photos. I mean, I knew vaguely from having worked in the archive, which was then at the Lake County Museum, not at the Newberry Library. I mean, I knew that Pitchford took some of his own photos, but when I saw what Bob Pitchford had out in Palm Desert, I was astounded. And I wish somebody would publish a book. The problem is, I don't know what's happened to the collection. I know that he has two, Bob Pitchford had 2 sons and a daughter. And one of the sons was very enthusiastic about my book. And I later went out, there was a Palm Springs History Day, and Bob Pitchford invited me to come out because they're going to have a tent publicizing G.I. Pitchford and his photography. And one of the sons was very friendly to me, and the daughter almost didn't want to acknowledge that I existed and that her father had assisted me. And she later tried to sell prints of her father's photographs with a website online, and that's disappeared. So I don't know what has happened to, since Bob Pitchford's death, I don't know what has happened to the photos, but there's a book there to be made of simply the photographs.
Oh, yes.
And I think that the compositions are, they're very, very good. They're kind of standard landscape, using landscape tropes from even the 19th century, from landscape painting. But technically they're good, and he taught himself.
Jeez.
So that's amazing. I hope these things still exist in a body somewhere.
Yeah.
Did you see any writing by Pitchford?
The only writing, unfortunately, there was a file of letters about this big that covered correspondence. He kept, I guess they were carbon copies. They must have been carbon copies, or had to have been. I don't recall. But they were his letters for about a 3 or 4 year period during the first 10 years he was working for Teich. And so I got firsthand descriptions of what it was like to be a sales agent on the road. But this was in like 1920, not during the linen period. And the collection that I saw had no other writings than these letters.
Because he has clearly a very strong relationship, I think, at least, to the artwork that was being done in the period that, say, the precisionist work. I could even envision a selection of linen cards amidst. In fact, you actually in your book implicitly suggested that those kinds of works, whether they were Hopper or anybody else, could actually coexist harmoniously with the linen cards. And so what I was thinking about with the writing was, did he ever express any interest in the art of the period? Because I was shocked at how expert his artwork, his sort of cartoon work in his that last image was. And I was saying, did he consider himself to be an artist because he was so emphatic, as you expressed it, emphatic in his opinions about how things should be dealt with? That just opened up a world of questions for me.
Well, I have to say, to answer that, I was very frustrated when I was there, because once I started seeing all this, I was saying, even in those early letters that I went through and photographed all of this, I was hoping to find him talking somewhere about art. I asked his son, Bob Pitchford, was he interested in, did he go to art museums? Was he interested? And the son said, no, he never expressed any knowledge about contemporary photography, famous photographers. He never talked about that, but his own desire to do really good work comes through. There's several times, I didn't quote any of these, but maybe it was that the Las Vegas, that composite card. He had earlier done one of Reno, and in the instructions to the art department for the Vegas card, I mean, he was writing almost angrily, "No, you people ruined the other card, and I don't want you to do that with this one. You follow my instructions to the letter." So he didn't always get what he wanted, but he was not afraid to vigorously tell them what he expected. On the other hand, he could easily say, put in a sunset. He knew what they would do. I mean, it was a genre, it was commercial art, but he was most definitely proud of what he was doing. The frustrating thing is that there really is no sense that he had any awareness of what anybody else was doing in the art world or the world of photography.
God, that's just so amazing. Did you get a sense?
There's no evidence.
Did you get a sense that, because I'm interested in this sort of unified appearance in a way, it's not precise, but a kind of unified appearance of the cards. And I wonder if there were meetings among the retouchers and the artists where they said, this is the kind of card we want to make, or did they just sort of emerge through making one and seeing another one and then making a third and just developing out of just their practice?
That's a really, really good question. I can't answer it directly. I don't really know, but there are different ways to look at it. One is that I find the aesthetic, the look, the appearance of linen cards so astonishingly amazing. These things come out of nowhere, and to the best of my knowledge, it comes from an economic motive. I mean, it's hard to imagine trying to shave off the cost of producing something that you sell for a penny, but they were trying to produce cards more cheaply, and those very delicate ones that look like sort of watercolor washes that start from 1900 to 1930, those often had far more lithographic plates, and what they were doing with this card, several things. They were moving to a cheaper ink. It was a water-based ink, and yet that to use that, it was more absorbent. Maybe I'm confusing this. It's in my book. Maybe it was they're moving from water. No, they're moving from oil to water-based paint, and it would be absorbed too quickly by the paper, and that's where the embossing came in, which gives us aristocratic, painterly canvas like the company would advertise in their trade literature. That was an accident because they had to come up with some embossing thing where the ink would soak in without moving, without spreading outward. It would soak down. So they had new inks, they had the new embossed paper, they had a new way of transferring the color instructions to make printing plates to streamline that process so that the colorists didn't have to be so knowledgeable and true craftspeople. You could train somebody to do this paint by number thing, in a sense, at this stage of making the different plates for the printing. And all these things came together, and the result was a new aesthetic. And I don't think they really knew that. I think they did it and they said, whoa, look at this. This is great. You ask about the artists, I have no idea, no way of knowing if they got together and tried to together come up with ways to improve the way things looked. What I can say is that I did read somewhere that a lot of the colorists, the female colorists, had been or were at the time students at the Chicago Art Institute. So it's possible. Now, a lot in the early years, even by 1930, a lot of the retouching artists they were all men, and a lot of them were still coming from Germany. It was a heavy component of Germans, of immigrants, and that weren't necessarily from Germany, but they hired a lot of first and second generation people to work there. And they may have been more trades, like craftspeople, tradespeople, vocational kind of thing. But I think the colorists were primarily female art students who either while they were students or later found that this is the only job they could get in commercial art. I mean, one of the reasons why the Chicago Art Institute had such a strong school is because they were turning out artists for the printing, the publishing business, which in the production side of printing in the United States was largely, Chicago was a major place for it. So it made sense to train commercial artists there. But whether or not they regarded what they were doing as art, whether or not they got together and talked about how to improve the way it looked, I don't know. I argue that that they did create it, but then, as all of you know who collect linen cards, 8 out of 10, well, there's a desert of cards that are just appalling. You think, how could anybody even have created this? How could this exist? Something, and I didn't show any of those, but there are tons of them that are just worthless, and they didn't show anything then. They don't show anything now. And so that kind of speaks against the idea that the company itself was fostering a kind of aesthetic view.
Could you talk about the Newberry collection? How to access that?
Okay, I actually can't speak to that because I did all the work when the archive was housed in the Lake County Museum. It's the County Museum of Lake County in Illinois, outside. It's a wealthy bedroom community of Chicago. And it's kind of an accident that wound up there. I mean, I have to talk about those people, even though it's no longer there, because they housed it for some 30 years. And Curt Teich Jr., who became the head of the company after Curt Teich Sr. kind of pulled away from it and retired, died. But there was another son, the surviving son of Curt Teich, around 1974, 1975, forget his first name, I think it might have been Ralph, but he was trying to find a home for all the company archive, which not only is a job file for almost every postcard they ever produced, going all the way back to 1900, with photographs, with airbrushed retouchings, with proof samples. It not only has that, but it has a mint copy of every card they ever produced, mint. And anyway, the youngest son, or the son who inherited all of this stuff, tried to give it to the Smithsonian, and they didn't want it. So finally, he got the Lake County Museum to take it on, and they put it in a separate building. They hired professional curatorial staff. These people were wonderful, and they managed also to gather in several other postcard collections, including one of the Lauder, the cosmetics family. One of the Lauders gave most of his postcards to Lake County Museum. And then I don't know what happened. And that's where I did all my research. I spent 3 weeks there at different times, week-long visits, 3 different times, and went through hundreds and hundreds of these production files and other things there. But at some point, I guess the museum decided the county museum decided they really couldn't continue maintaining this. This is probably about 20 years ago. They had architect plans for a whole new museum building to house it. It was going to be spectacular. And the next thing I heard was that it had been, I don't know, conveyed, I presume sold, to the Newberry Library in Chicago, which is a very well-known institution. And I don't know how you access things there, but I know that you do.
I can help with that.
Okay.
Will Hansen, Hansen, is I think he's the major curator there at the Newberry, in charge of the Teich cards. And frankly, you can just email him. I'm sure you can get the email off of their website. And he, to me at least, was very accommodating and helpful. And they have 30-day short-term scholarship opportunities for you that you can apply for and get 30 days there and do whatever investigation and research you want. But I spent 2 or 3 days there just going to Chicago and talking to Will and showing up and saying, this is the kind of stuff that I want to look at. Well, not slight, but great frustration is they're all organized according to the order number. And so if you want dams or you want skyscrapers, you might go through 300 cards and get 2 skyscrapers. And so it's really hard to study it. At least I found it so, in a thematic sort of a way. What Jerrfrey is saying about having the scrapbooks where you can look through them and then glean from that the numbers of the cards you want, then you can get those, and they make copies for you, JPEGs, which are pretty darn good for ridiculously cheap, from my point of view at least. Just a few bucks for a copy that you could use in publications. I mean, that's some of the stuff that I have off the top of my head.
If I could add one thing. I suspect they probably have this there. The Teich company had an index, a geographic index, where you could look up a place, and then you could find the numbers of all cards they had published illustrating that place. And I presume that the Newberry still has that.
I didn't.
And
see that,
I think
so,
it had been, it was computerized by the people at the Lake County Museum. And they would, you could send them a geographic location, they'd send you a printout for a small fee. I mean, and it was small, a printout of all the cards, I think with numbers, with the serial number that represented that place. I don't know if that's still available or not.
Just to advertise, Ashley put all the links that you're talking about in the chat. Thank you, Ashley. So you can look both the geographic index and more.
Any other questions?
I have a
Go ahead.
fun things. One of the postcards that you showed was used for making a COVID postcard.
I'm sorry, what postcard?
One of the postcard that you show, that you was used, taking the image completely as is, and then changed slightly to make it a postcard about COVID. If you want, I can show it to you.
I'd love to see it.
one quick question I have about captions. Do you know who wrote captions particularly? Oh, there. Oh, yeah,
That's great.
You can find all these postcards on the database that is created for 1,900 plus postcard about the COVID pandemic.
That's funny.
You ask about captions. Yes, the sales agents wrote the captions.
I was particularly taken by Native American captions, which are extremely detailed and intermittently patronizing and or racist. And I thought, who wrote these? These are fascinating way of understanding more about how America saw America and Native Americans in this specific case, and that the captions would either initiate or confirm opinions about the picture on the front. And who wrote those captions?
Well, I can tell you that for Native Americans from the Southwest, G.I. Pitchford wrote them.
Oh, really?
Yes, the sales agents wrote the captions.
Oh, that is fascinating. Yeah.
And, and he would write them down. I mean, sometimes he'd write on the back of he'd write on hotel stationery. He'd write a caption on the back of a photograph, but he composed the captions. And in fact, some of those, it wasn't a folder of cards. You know, they have those accordion folders, but there were also some little booklets that Teich published. That the images were also postcard images, but these were actually booklets that look like a little book, and you leaf through it. And there's one on, I forget Native Americans, I forget what state they're from, but there were very extensive captions that were intending to be informational, kind of like encyclopedia entries. And that book was actually signed at the very end. It says G.I. Pitchford.
Oh, no
And
kidding.
so he obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but I presume he put a lot of effort into writing the text for that booklet and insisted that he get credit.
Oh,
or,
it's funny because
or that they felt they had to give him credit because he did all, I don't know. But he wrote his captions. And for the ethnic cards, also cards from Chinatown, he often wrote long captions. I showed the image of that excluded the African Americans from the bar in Tijuana. There's, you can find some interesting things having to do with patronizing attitudes and so on. There's one image of Navajo sand painters, and in the file for that card, there's a young man who's standing in the background looking right at the camera. And Pitchford's written instructions include make eyes downcast. Now you could say, okay, and the Indians are supposed to look down when they gazed at by white people, or you could just say, you can't have this guy staring right at the camera, right out of the card. But so you have to be kind of careful in interpreting those kinds of patronizing comments. Well, are they really patronizing, or is that we just kind of imposing that on the card? I don't know. But it's fascinating.
Yeah, that's funny because it puts me in mind of a comment that you made in your book where about the young woman overlooking the landscape, and you said in the background is a man with his eyes downcast, perhaps in regret. And I thought maybe he was just looking down and afraid of the heights.
I had a lot of fun reading the. I mean, I went too far with a lot of them, reading the images, and I realized that I was projecting my own interpretations onto the images, but I was having fun, and they're there. People can take them or leave them.
Oh, I thought you did some brilliant work with that stuff. I mean, really, that more of that kind of thing needs to be done.
And the other thing that I found was really useful was Google Maps. I mean, there'd be a scene, and scene here. I say, well, what's the terrain like? What's really there? And I would go to Google Maps and move around and find the place as it exists now and kind of go around back behind. And sometimes I could learn about a place more than I could have learned just from the image by using Google Maps and also just Googling for images of the same place at different times.
You know, I'm looking at that card with the young woman, the San Bernardino Grayback Mountains, and it's interesting. She looks very much like Carol Lombard.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that whole style with her hair, her face, but I was wondering, was that style, the clothing she's wearing, sort of very popular with an upper class group of people? I mean, it is very stylish. You know, it's not something you see in postcards very often.
There's got to be somebody among you who can answer that better than I can.
Mm.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yep, quite a card.
Did Bader actually, in conversation with you, did Bader say specifically that he felt his paintings were analogous and visually in some way to the linen cards, or did he just like linen cards?
I never met him, but we exchanged emails.
Oh, okay.
And yes, he said that he was very heavily influenced by them.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Because I've known John for a long time, and we've never discussed that, but I find that an interesting topic. Do you pronounce your name Michael or Meikle?
It's Meikle. It's Scottish, not German.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And probably it's more Meikle among Lowland Scots, but in the UK, people just call it Meikle. It's not unknown. I think not very many Meikles made it out of Scotland. They weren't the enterprise ones.
Any other questions? If not, thank you. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you.
It's great. It's very good. And the book is very good. If you don't have the book, I highly recommend it. I've been reading it from beginning. I haven't not that far through. It's a pretty thick book, but it's very good. It really
I would
is.
recommend it too. It's a wonderful book. Wonderful book. Thank you.
I agree.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's an essential book, I'd say. Even, it's just really quite important.
Thank you for such a great reception. I enjoyed this very much.